China's invisible armada, 17,000 ships, and the world can barely see a fraction of them. Right now, there's a system that tracks nearly every ship at sea, every vessel, broadcasting its position, plotted on a live map in real time. Thousands of them, crawling across every ocean on Earth. And you'd think, with a system like that, we can see everything, that nothing moves on the water without somebody knowing. But around the Galapagos Islands, that map shows almost nothing. A few scattered dots. Empty ocean. Peaceful. Except it's a lie. Because right now, as you listen to this, there are more than 100 vessels swarming those waters. They're just invisible. They blink onto the map and vanish. On again, off again. Ghosts. And off the coast of Africa, off South America, off North Korea, the same thing is happening. They're out there right now, and nobody can see them. So how does a steel ship the size of a building just disappear off a global tracking system? And why is one country better at this trick than anyone else alive? Stick with me, because the answer is so much bigger than fishing. It's about who controls the oceans, who feeds the planet, and who's already quietly lost a race they didn't even know they were running. Hit subscribe right now, because what I'm about to tell you sounds completely made up. A fleet of ghosts, thousands strong, hunting the seas while the whole world stares at an empty map. It isn't made up. Every number you're about to hear is real. And by the end, you'll never look at the seafood in your supermarket the same way again. Let's start with the obvious question. How do we see any of these ships in the first place? All those thousands of dots, they're not leaked from some secret database. We see them because nearly every major vessel runs a system called AIS, the Automatic Identification System. Think of it as a chat room for ships. A tanker sails along, constantly shouting into the void. Here I am, this is my name, this is my speed, this is my heading, these are my exact coordinates. A non-stop stream of updates broadcast to every other ship, every coastal station, every satellite overhead. And what's it for? Not for you and me. The entire point is to stop two floating skyscrapers from slamming into each other in the dark. A captain isn't staring at some abstract dot. He's looking at a specific tanker with a name and a full set of details, and he can steer around it. Convenient. And it's not optional either. The International Maritime Organization requires it. You want to sail international routes? You keep your AIS on. Those are the rules. And now here's where it gets insane. Despite all those rules, shutting the system off is trivial. No hackers, no sabotage. Sometimes it's a single physical switch. A couple of clicks in the navigation console, and the ship is gone. 1 second, it's a labeled dot with a name and a destination. The next, nothing. To anyone watching, it becomes a ghost ship, or in the professional language, a shadow vessel. So, does that mean ships from any country can just disappear and do whatever they want out there, unseen? Yes, exactly. But according to investigation after investigation, one country has gotten better at this than anyone else on the planet: China. The research shows that as of 2026, China commands what amounts to a true distant water fleet of up to 17,000 vessels. Sit with that number, 17,000. That's several times larger than the fleets of Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, and Spain combined. And a huge share of those ships go dark on purpose, flipping off AIS whenever it suits them, vanishing from the map at will. So why? Why would the world's second biggest economy run a fleet of ghosts? The first big reason is brutally simple: resources. Take the Galapagos. This is one of the richest fishing grounds on the entire planet. The water there teems with life, dense schools of fish, constant movement, everywhere you look. And that's no accident. This is the point where major ocean currents collide and shove nutrient-packed water up from the deep, feeding everything above it. But the real prize is squid, and night after night, hundreds of Chinese ghost ships flood these waters, blaze enormous lights down into the Black Sea, and squid, schooling creatures, drawn to light like moths to a flame, swim straight up into the nets. Once they gather under the glow, the crews simply haul them aboard. An almost effortless catch. But hold on. You don't need to be a ghost ship to catch squid. Squid don't check who's fishing for them. So why bother going dark? Because of an invisible line on the water. Ecuador controls the Galapagos, and around those islands sits an exclusive economic zone, a protected ring stretching 124 miles out, where foreign vessels can't legally fish without serious consequences. Get caught fishing for squid inside that zone as a Chinese vessel, and it's not a routine slap on the wrist, it's an international scandal. There's open ocean beyond the zone where fishing is legal. But here's the problem. The squid don't read maps. They cluster inside the protected zone, exactly where the ships aren't allowed to be. So here's the move. A Chinese vessel cruises right up to the 200-mile boundary of Ecuador's zone and switches off AIS gone, off the Coast Guard screens entirely. And while the patrol boats are sweeping the open ocean looking for it, the ship creeps inward at low speed, deeper into the zone where the squid concentrations are thickest. Holds full, it slides back out into international waters and flips AIS back on. And from the outside, it looks like the vessel was just sitting still or drifting harmlessly outside the zone the whole time. Clean, invisible. Now here's the kicker. How often does this actually work? In 2020, the watchdog group Oceana tracked around 300 Chinese fishing vessels near the islands at the same time. 300. And in just 1 month, they logged more than 73,000 hours of fishing activity, and it only grew from there. From 2021 to 2023, that same Oceana investigation counted 510 vessels, more than any other country operating in the region, and the total time spent hunting squid around the Galapagos climbed to 134,000 hours. Let that sink in. And here's the part nobody's talking about. This isn't one isolated spot. Chinese vessels line up off the coast of Peru, off Chile. They form a long, glowing chain down the entire coastline of Argentina. And these aren't one-off incidents. This is a consistent, ongoing pattern. Take northern Chile, the Iquique region. According to local maritime authorities, around 229 vessels were operating there in 2025 alone, and the overwhelming majority were Chinese, all doing the exact same thing, hunting squid. Move farther south toward Argentina, and the scale gets even more striking. According to Oceana, from 2018 to 2021, hundreds of foreign fishing vessels were working the edge of Argentine waters. And once again, most of them were Chinese. This isn't an accident. This is a machine, running the same play across 2 continents. So at this point, you're probably shouting at your screen, just catch them, seriously. The ship is right there, the nets are in the water, it's inside the zone. Where's the leverage? Where's the consequence? On paper, it all looks simple. Any foreign vessel that enters an exclusive economic zone can be stopped, boarded, inspected, fined, even seized. It sounds like a system that should work. But in reality, it breaks down almost immediately because most of this activity doesn't happen cleanly inside the zone. It happens right along the edge or completely outside it. And out there, the rules change entirely. In international waters, a vessel falls under the jurisdiction of one country and one country only, its flag state. Whatever flag it sails under, that's the nation responsible for dealing with it. And if that flag is Chinese, then Ecuador, Peru, Chile, anyone else, they have almost no power to intervene at all. Fine, you say, so don't catch them in the act. Track them afterward. The catch has to go somewhere, right? Warn the ports, block the sails, raise the alarm. Sounds reasonable. But no, that usually fails too, because the entire system is engineered to leave as little trace as humanly possible. These ghost vessels almost never enter port carrying their catch. They drift the open ocean for months, running the same cycle over and over, reach the grounds, kill the lights, do the job, slip away, then surface somewhere else with AIS back on as if nothing ever happened. Which raises the obvious question, then who actually carries the catch home? This is where it gets sophisticated. Roughly 20 to 30 miles beyond the borders of these economic zones, enormous refrigerated cargo ships, known as reefers, sit waiting offshore in the dark, just waiting for the right moment. At night, the smaller fishing boats approach them with no lights on. Identification systems completely shut down, and the transfer begins. Tons of squid go up onto the reefer, and in return, the fishing boats receive fuel, food, supplies, everything they need to stay at sea for months without ever once touching land. And that's it. that's where the trail goes cold. Because from that moment on, it's the reefer that carries the cargo to port. And on paper, that squid is suddenly legitimate, supposedly caught legally out on the high seas. You'd think the scheme couldn't get any more layered than that, but it does. Many investigations uncover another trick entirely: flags of convenience. The vessel isn't even legally Chinese. It's registered in some other country, usually one where oversight is weak or barely a formality. So the picture becomes genuinely bizarre. One country on the paperwork, a different nationality in the crew, and owners based somewhere else entirely. Responsibility gets shattered across 3 jurisdictions, and figuring out who's actually behind it becomes nearly impossible. And that brings me to something I need to be straight with you about, because it's easy to talk about this as a story of ships and stats, but there are people on these vessels. So how do the crews feel about all this? Don't any of them refuse, quit, walk away? In reality, that's hardly even an option. Investigation after investigation tells the same story. Life on these ships isn't a job you can simply leave. It's closer to a floating prison, and most of these people didn't sign up for a criminal operation. The reality is far more ordinary. They were just looking for work. They were promised decent pay, a stable contract, a routine voyage, a way out of a hard situation. And that's where the first trap closes: debt. They have to pay for the paperwork, for the middlemen, for a spot on the vessel. So by the time they leave shore, they're already carrying an obligation to work it off, in debt before the job has even started. Then comes the isolation. Investigations show crews having their documents confiscated, their communication cut off. The ship may not enter port for months, sometimes years, because the reefers resupply it at sea, so it never has to come back. And at that point, any real choice is gone. You can't leave when there's nothing around you but water. You can't switch jobs. You can't even say you don't want to do this anymore. People spend months, sometimes longer, running the same route over and over, Galapagos to Chile to Argentina, no breaks. And it gets worse. Investigations from 2013 to 2025 documented cases where workers literally didn't have enough food. And worse than that, not enough water, plain drinking water. From the outside, it looks like a flawlessly organized system, a huge fleet, precise routes, efficient logistics. Inside are people who control almost nothing, not the route, not the conditions, not even how long they're trapped out there. And here's the twist that reopens this entire thing. Did you think this was only about squid? It's not. Because investigation after investigation says it plainly. China's ghost fleet catches fish too. And in those cases, the schemes get even more elaborate. So let's move to Africa, to Ghana. The waters there are packed with fishing vessels, and on paper, everything looks perfectly legitimate. Every one of them is registered as Ghanaian. Not a word about China, and officially that all checks out because foreign companies are barred from directly owning the medium and large fishing vessels. Those are supposed to belong only to local owners. Check the registry, and that's exactly what you find. But then you hit what investigators call paper masking. According to the Environmental Justice Foundation, as many as 90% of those vessels are actually controlled by Chinese companies. And the same pattern shows up in Senegal, in the Gambia, in Guinea-Bissau, much of West Africa's coastline, quietly blanketed by fleets tied to China. So maybe at least the fishing itself is more or less open and official. According to multiple organizations, no. In Ghana, there's evidence of so-called psycho fishing, where large trawlers transfer their catch directly at sea to small boats, which then sell the fish at local markets with no reporting, no oversight, completely outside the legal system. In 2017 alone, that shadow catch amounted to as much as 100,000 tons of fish. Another example takes us much closer to China, off the coast of North Korea, where one of the largest operations of its kind was ever observed. Satellite data caught hundreds of Chinese trawlers hauling Pacific sauri, a commercially valuable fish used for processing and export. Most of them had their AIS switched off, effectively vanishing from every tracking system. And researchers from Global Fishing Watch estimated that in a single year, those ships caught hundreds of thousands of tons of fish worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's still not the strangest thing these ghost vessels have been doing. After interviewing 88 crew members from Chinese fishing vessels, researchers found that more than 95% said they'd been involved in shark fishing. Many described shark finning, slicing the fins off a shark and dumping the rest of the still-living animal back into the sea. And there's one example that shows just how massive this can get. In 2017, a Chinese vessel was detained near the Galapagos. When authorities inspected it, they found more than 6,600 shark carcasses, including rare species like hammerheads, many of them missing their fins. The total weight topped 300 tons. It was one of the largest seizures of protected marine animals the region had ever seen. And that was just one ship. Think that was the end of it? It wasn't. There have also been documented cases of Chinese vessels in Somali waters catching virtually everything in sight: orcas, dolphins, turtles, species protected under both local law and international agreements. And this is where the scale becomes truly staggering, because it's clear this is doing real environmental damage. But how badly does it hurt the people who actually live there? Very badly. Start with West Africa, where you don't need charts or statistics to understand it. You just walk down to the shore, take one look, and realize something has gone deeply wrong. In Senegal, fish was the foundation of life for decades. Food, income, the very rhythm of everyday existence. For generations, people went out to sea and came back with a catch. Then the large industrial fleets moved into these waters, and the pressure became so intense that the ecosystem simply couldn't take it. According to independent experts, about 57% of the country's key fish stocks are now in a state of collapse. That doesn't mean a little less fish than before. It means familiar species are vanishing on a scale people would have found unthinkable just 10 or 15 years ago. And from there, the chain reaction begins. People who spent their entire lives fishing off their own coast suddenly come home empty-handed, day after day, week after week, until at some point it becomes painfully clear they can no longer live this way. Some leave for the cities, some take whatever work they can find, and some make the most dangerous choice of all, climbing into an open boat to try to reach Europe. And many of them say it outright. The reason is that the fish are gone. Are people not angry enough to fight back? They are. And nowhere is that clearer than in the Gambia. Local fishermen there don't just go out to sea to make a catch. They go out determined to defend their waters. When industrial trawlers come too close to shore, protests erupt, routes get blocked, clashes break out, and in some cases boats have even been set on fire. And across West Africa as a whole, the picture gets more alarming still. Analysts estimate that pressure from foreign industrial fishing fleets, including ones linked to Chinese companies, has wiped out more than 300,000 jobs in traditional fishing. And those are only the official estimates. Behind those numbers are real people, real families, entire coastal communities that are simply ceasing to exist. So let's stop and think about that for a second. If this industry means fishing on such a colossal scale, with complex schemes, constant danger, and brutal conditions on board, then why doesn't China just fish closer to its own shores? Seriously, the country's coastline is enormous, more than 11,000 miles long. So why spend billions on fuel sending fleets all the way across the planet to Africa and South America? The answer is that behind the glossy image of the world's biggest economy lies an environmental disaster. China has essentially exhausted its own seas. Over the past 50 years, its coastal resources were exploited so aggressively that populations of many commercial species have collapsed by 80 to 90%. In recent years, it's become almost absurd. In places like the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea, going out to fish often isn't even profitable anymore. Fuel and operating costs run higher than the value of the catch itself. And that's only part of it. For decades, waste from thousands of factories poured into coastal waters, producing recurring red tides, toxic algae blooms that effectively wipe out marine life. So is China doing nothing about it? Actually, it is. The government introduced strict measures, including a 10-year fishing ban on parts of the Yangtze, and there are already faint signs of recovery. But here's the problem. The ocean isn't a machine. You can't just switch it off and turn it back on. Recovery takes decades, and businesses need to make money now. The country needs seafood now. So when there's nothing left at home, the fleet goes where the fish still are, And there's one more twist in this, hiding in plain sight. And it's about what people choose to eat. China is the global leader in aquaculture. An enormous share of its fish is farm-raised. And yet consumers increasingly want wild-caught fish instead. Why? Because they don't trust farmed seafood. Scandals over antibiotics, hormones, and feed quality have fueled demand for fish seen as coming from the clean, open ocean. And that creates a vicious cycle. Because fish farms need fish meal. And fish meal is made from small fish, the exact same kind those ghost vessels are scooping up in huge quantities off the coast of Africa. So this is what it all comes down to. China has a population of nearly 1.5 billion people, and a coastline that, even in perfect condition, still couldn't fully feed the country. Put plainly, the shadow fleet isn't a choice. It's a matter of survival. So, is there any real chance this ever changes? Could governments or international bodies actually rein this fleet in? Here's where the future is already arriving. The Shadow Fleet's great weapon is darkness. Flip off AIS, and the vessel practically disappears. But that's no longer the trump card it used to be. The technology has caught up, and the rules of the game have shifted. Companies like Hawkeye 360 have learned to hunt ships an entirely different way, not by their broadcast coordinates, but by their own electronic noise. Because a ship is never a silent machine. Even with AIS dead, a vessel is still running radar, satellite communications, onboard radios, and all of that leaks signals into the air. Hiding them is nearly impossible, so satellites can simply listen to the ocean, pick up that electronic hum, and pin a vessel's location to within a few hundred feet. You can switch off the chat room. You cannot switch off physics. But could this fleet be choked off another way, financially, through international trade? Here's where it gets really interesting, because that process has already started. In June 2022, members of the World Trade Organization, China included, signed the Fisheries Subsidies Agreement, a genuine landmark. For the first time, it explicitly banned government support for vessels involved in illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And here's the key. China's distant water fleet runs heavily on subsidies. The fuel, the maintenance, the very ability to operate thousands of miles from home, all of it partly backed by the state. So, if that agreement is ever truly enforced, a huge number of these voyages could simply stop making economic sense. Sounds like a turning point, doesn't it? But here's the honest truth, and I want to be straight with you about it. On paper, the tools are finally taking shape. Satellites that can hear in the dark, treaties that can bite. In reality, things are far more complicated. Because judging by the investigative reports, nothing has stopped overnight. The Chinese ghost ships are still surfacing off the coasts of Ecuador, off Ghana, off Argentina, exactly as they did before. The technology to see them exists. The law to choke them exists. What's missing is the will to actually use either one against a fleet this enormous, flying this many flags, spread across this many jurisdictions. And it's worth saying plainly, China is far from the only country whose vessels fish hard and fish dirty. Distant water fleets from other nations operate in these same gray zones too. China is simply the biggest by an enormous margin, and the best at vanishing. So here's what stays with me. Somewhere out there tonight, the lights are blazing over black water, the nets are coming up full, and a crew that hasn't touched land in months is hauling in a catch that will be perfectly legal by the time it reaches a plate on the other side of the world. The Ghost Fleet isn't a glitch in the system, it's a system working exactly as it was designed to, and most of the planet still can't see it happening. The future where machines can hear a ship through the darkness is already here. The only question left is whether anyone actually chooses to use it. So I want to know what you think. Should the countries buying all this seafood be forced to prove where it actually came from? To trace every fish back to the water it was pulled from? Or is that simply impossible on an ocean this vast? Tell me down in the comments. And if this opened your eyes to what's hiding just past the horizon, subscribe. Because the next thing those satellites are starting to hear out there is even stranger than this.